Hello guys, I am Taiba and you are watching your own channel Audiovisual Books. The Diary of a Young Girl. We have started. Let's see. Today it's more pages. Dearest Tuesday, May 18, 1943. Dearest Kitty, I recently witnessed a fierce dogfight between German and English pilots. Unfortunately, a couple of allied airmen had to jump out of their burning plane. Our milkman, who lived in Halfweg, saw four Canadians sitting along the side of the road, and one of them spoke fluent Dutch. He asked the milkman if he had a light for his cigarette, and then told him the crew had consisted of 6 men. The pilot had been burned to death, and the fifth crew member had hidden himself somewhere. The German security police came to pick up the four remaining men, none of whom were injured. After parachuting out of a flame plane, how can anyone have such presence of mind? Although it is undeniably hot, we have to light a fire every other day to burn our vegetables, peelings, and garbage. We can't throw anything into trash cans because the warehouse employees might see it. One small act of carelessness, and we are done for. All college students are being asked to sign an official statement to the fact that they sympathize with the Germans and approve of the new order. 80% have decided to obey the dictates of their conscience, but the penalty will be severe. Any student refusing to sign will be sent to a German labor camp. What is to become of the youth of our country if they are all got to do hard labor in Germany? Last night, the guns were making so much noise that mother shut the window. I was in Pim's bed. Suddenly, right above our heads, we heard Mrs. Wendy leap up as if she had been bitten by a mosquito. This was followed by a loud boom, which sounded as if a firebomb had launched beside my bed. Lights, lights, I screamed. Pim switched on the lamp. I expected the room to burst into flames any minute. Nothing happened. We all rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Mr. and Mrs. Wendy had seen a red glow through the open window, and he thought there was a fire nearby, while she was certain our house was ablaze. Mrs. Wendy was already standing beside her bed with her knee knocking when the boom came. Nuzzle stayed upstairs to smoke a cigarette, and we crawled back into the bed. Less than 15 minutes later, the shooting started again. Mrs. Wandy sprang out of bed and went downstairs to Drizzle's room to seek the comfort she was unable to find with her spouse. Drizzle welcomed her with the words, "Come into my bed, my child." We burst into peals of laughter, and the roar of the guns bothered us no more. Our fears had all been swept away. Jorzen, Sunday, June 13, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the poem Father, composed for my birthday, is too nice to keep to myself. Since Pim writes his verses only in German, Margaret volunteered to translate it into Dutch. See for yourself whether Margaret has not done herself proud. It begins with the usual summary of the year's event and then continues. As youngest among us, but small no more, your life can be trying, for we have the chore of becoming your teacher, a terrible bore. We have got experience, Take it from me, we have done this all before, you see. We know the ropes, we know the same. Since time immortal, since time immemorial, always the same. One's own shortcomings are nothing but fluff, but everything else's are heavier stuff. Fault finding comes easy when this is our plight, but it is hard for your parents, try as they might, to treat you with fairness and kindness as well. Nitpicking's habit that is hard to dispel when you are living with old folks. All you can do is put up with their nagging. It is hard, but it is true. The pill may be bitter, but down it must go, for it is meant to keep the peace you know. The many months here have not been in vain, since wasting time knows against your brain. Since wasting time goes against your brain, you read and study nearly all the day, determined to chase the boredom away. The more difficult question, much harder to bear, is what on earth do I have to wear? I have got no more panties, my clothes are too tight, my shirt is loincloth, I am rarely a Siat. To put on my shoes, I must off my toes. Oh dear, I am plagued. I am plagued with so many woes. Margaret had trouble getting the part about food or to rhyme, so I am leaving it out. But aside from that, don't you think it is a good poem? For the rest, I have been thoroughly spoiled and have received a number of lovely presents, including a big book on my favorite subject, Greek and Roman mythology. Nor can I complain about the lake of candy. Everyone had dipped into their last reserves. As the Benjamin of the annex, I got more than I deserve. Yours in. Tuesday, June 15, 1943. Dearest Kitty, heaps of things have happened, but I often think I am boring you with my dreary chit chat, and that you had just as soon have fewer letters, so I will keep the news brief. Mr. Voskugil was not operated on for his ulcer after all. Once the doctor had him on the operating table and opened him up, they saw that he had cancer. It was in such an advanced stage that an operation was pointless. So they stitched him up again, kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, fed him away, and sent him back home. But they made an unforgivable error. They told the poor man exactly what was in store for him. He can't work anymore, and he is just sitting at home, surrounded by his 8 children, brooding about his approaching death. I feel very sorry for him and the hate not being able to go out. Otherwise, I had visit him as often as I could and help take his mind off matters. Now the good man can no longer let us know what is being said and done in the warehouse, which is a disaster for us. Mr. Vaskulji was our great source of help and support when it came to safety matters. We miss him very much. Next month, next month it is our turn to hand over our radio to the authorities. Mr. Kleeman has a small set hidden in his room that he is giving us to replace our beautiful cabinet radio. It is a pity we have to turn in our big Philip, but when we are in hiding, you can't afford to bring the authorities down on your heads. Of course, we will put the baby radio upstairs. What is a clandestine radio when there are already clandestine Jews and clandestine money all over the country? People are trying to get hold of an old radio that they can hand over instead of their moral booster. It is true, as the reports from outside grow worse and worse. The radio, with its wondrous voice, helps us not to lose heart and to keep telling ourselves, cheer up, keep our spirits high, things are bound to get better. Yours and Sunday, July 1943. Dear Kitty, to get back to the subject of child rearing for the umpteenth time, let me tell you that I am doing my best to be helpful, friendly, and kind, and to do all I can do to keep the reins of rebukes down to a light drizzle. It is not easy trying to behave like a model child with people you can't stand, especially when you don't mean a word of it. But I can see that a little hypocrisy gets me a lot further than mad method of saying exactly what I think, even though no one ever asks me my opinion or cares one way or other. Of course, I often forget my role and find it impossible to curb my anger, but they are unfair, so that they spend the next month saying the most impertinent girl in the world. Don't you think I am to be pitied? Sometimes it is a good thing I am not the grouchy type, because then I might become sore and bad tempered. I can usually see the humorous side of their scoldings. But it is easier when somebody else is being wrecked over the coals. Further, I have decided, after a great deal of thought, to drop the shorthand. First, so that I have more time for my other subjects, and second, because of my eyes. That is a sad story. I have become very nearsighted, and I should have had glasses ages ago. Oh, would not I look like a dope? But as you know, people in hiding can't. Yesterday, all anyone here could talk about was Anne's eyes, because mother had suggested I go to the ophthalmologist with Mrs. Kleeman. Just hearing this made my knees weak, since it is no small matter. Going outside, just think of it. Walking about the street, I can't imagine it. I was mortified at first and then glad. But it is not as simple as all that. The various authorities who had to approve such a step were unable to reach a quick decision. They first had to carefully weigh all the difficulties and risks. And though Meep was ready to set off immediately with me in tow, in the meantime I had taken my grey coat from the closet, but it was so small it looked as if might have belonged to my little sister, Willow the hem. But I still could not button it. I am really curious to see what they decide. Only I don't think they will ever work out a plan, because the British have landed in Sicily and fathers all set off the quick finish. Perhaps been giving Margaret and me a lot of office work to do. It makes us both feel important, and it is a big help of her. Anyone can file letters and make entries in the sales book, but we do it with remarkable accuracy. Mip has so much to carry, she looks like a pack mule. She goes forth nearly every day to scrounge up vegetables and then bicycles back with her purchasing in large shopping bags. She is also the one who brings 5 library books with her every Saturday. We long for Saturdays because that means books. We are like a bunch of little kids with a present. Ordinary people don't know how much books can mean to someone who is cooped up. Our only diversions are reading, studying, listening the radio. Yours then. Tuesday, July 30, 1943. The best little table. Yesterday afternoon, father gave me the permission to ask Mr. Russell whether he would please be so good as to allow me. See how polite I am. To use the table in our room 2 afternoon a week from 4 to 5:30. I already sit there every day from 2:30 to 4 while Russell takes a nap, but the rest of the time the room and the table are off limits to me. It is impossible to study next door in the afternoon because there is too much going on. Besides, our father sometimes likes to sit at the desk during the afternoon. So it seemed like a reasonable request that I asked Dazzle very politely, "What do you think?" The little gentleman's reply was, "No, just plain no." I was incensed and was not about to let myself be put off like that. I asked him the reason for his no, but this did not get me anywhere. The gist of his reply was, "I have to study too, you know, and if I can't do that in the afternoons, I would not be able to fit it in at all. I have to finish the task I have set for myself, otherwise, there is no point in starting. Besides, you are not serious about your studies. Mythology. What kind of work is that? Reading and knitting don't count either. I use that table and I am not going to give it up." I replied, "Mr. Dussel, I do take my work seriously. I can't study next door in the afternoons, and I would appreciate it if you would reconsider my request." Having said these words, the insulted and turned around and pretended the learned doctor was not there. I was saying with I was seething with rage and felt that Dazzle had been incredibly rude, which he certainly had been, and that I had been very polite. That evening, when I managed to get hold of him, I told him that had happened and we discussed what my next step should be because I had no intention of giving up and prefer to deal with the matter myself. Pim have gave me a rough idea of how to approach Dazzle, but cautioned me to wait until the next day, since I was in such a flap. I ignored this last piece of advice and waited for Dazzle after the dishes had been done. Pim was sitting next door, and that had a calming effect. I began. "Mr. Russell, you seem to believe further discussion of the matter in pointless, and I beg you to reconsider." Russell gave me his most charming smile and said, "I am always prepared to discuss the matter, even though it is already been settled." I went on talking despite Russell's repeated interruptions. "When you first came here," I said, "we agreed that the room was to be shared by the two of us. If we were not, if we were to divide it fairly, you have the entire morning and I have the entire afternoon. I am not asking for that much, but 2 afternoons a week does seem reasonable to me." Leapt out of his chair as if he had sat on a pin. "You have no business talking about your rights to the room. Where am I supposed to go? Maybe I should ask Mr. Vandon to build me a cubby hole in the attic. You are not the only one who can't find a quiet place to work. You are always looking for a fight. If your sister Margaret, who has more right to work space than you do, had come to me with the same request, I had never even have thought of refusing. But you—" And once again he brought up the business about the mythology and the knitting, and once again and was insulted. However, I showed no sign of it and let Dazzle finish. But no, it is impossible to talk to you. You are shamefully self centered. No one else matters. As long as you get your way. I have never seen such a child. But after all is said and done, I will be obliged to let you have your way. And since I don't want people saying later on that Anne Frank failed her exam because Mr. Dussel refused to relinquish his table, he went on and on until there was such a deluge of words I could hardly keep up. For one fleeting moment, I thought him and his lies. I will smack his ugly mug so hard he will go bouncing off the wall. But the next moment, I thought, calm down, he is not worth getting so upset about. At long, at long last, Mr. Dussel's fury was spent, and he left the room with an expression of triumph mixed with wrath, his coat pockets bulging with food. I went running over to father and recounted the entire story, or at least those parts he had not been able to follow himself. Rim decided to talk to Dussel that very same evening, and they spoke for more than half an hour. They first discussed whether Anne should be allowed to use the table, yes or no. Father said that he and Russell had dealt with the subject once before, and with matter he has possessed to agree with Russell because he did not want to contradict the elder in the front of the younger. But that even then he had not thought it was fair. Russell felt I had no right to talk as if he were an intruder, laying claim to everything inside. But father protested so strongly since he himself had heard me say nothing of the kind. And so the conversation went back and forth with father defending my selfishness and my busy work and Russell grumbling the whole time. Rizal finally had to give in, and I was granted the opportunity to work without interruption 2 afternoons a week. Rizal looked very sullen, did not speak to me for 2 days, and when sure he occupied the table from 5 to 5:30, all very childish, of course. Anyone who is so pretty and pedantic at the age of 54 was born that way and is never going to change. Friday, July 16, 1943. Dearest Kitty, there has been another break in, but this time a real one. Peter went down to the warehouse this morning at 7 as usual and noticed at once that both the warehouse doors and the street doors were open. He immediately reported this to Beam, who went to the private office, turned the radio to a German station, and locked the door. Then they both went back upstairs. In such cases, our orders are not to wash bathrooms. And as usual, we followed this to the letter. We were all glad we had slept so well and had not heard anything. For a while, we were indignant because no one from the office came upstairs the entire morning. Mr. Clement left us on tenterhook until 11:30. He told that the burglars had forced the outside door and the warehouse door with a crowbar, but when they did not find anything worth stealing, they tried their luck on the next floor. They stole 2 cash boxes containing 40 guilders, blank checkbooks, and worst of all, coupons for 330 pounds of sugar, our entire allotment. It would not be easy to wangle new ones. Mr. Gugler thinks this burglar belongs to the same as the one who made an unsuccessful attempt 6 weeks ago to open all 3 doors, the warehouse door and the 2 outside doors. The burglary caused another stir, but the annex seems to thrive in excitement. Naturally, we were glad the cash register and the typewriter had been safely tuned away in our closet.